Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about a classic, an old movie,
Yes.
as the kids now would be calling it, The Matrix.
Yes.
20 years old.
I
this
know.
Year, 1999.
It's so interesting, really, kind of, the way your mind works in relation to these things. Because I remember, I worked with older colleagues, like, when I first started teaching, and, like, films from the 1950s seemed absolutely prehistoric to me, right? Like, it was, I don't know, almost like before time began, right? Like, and I always kind of had this curiosity about, what was it like to see Rebel Without a Cause, like in a proper cinema when it came out, and how did people react, right? It was almost like, you thought of it as a previous century just because it was before you were born. And of course, now myself, I first started going to the pictures in the 70s, right? So, kind of for me, something like The Matrix, it feels like yesterday that I saw it, right? And yet, of course, it's 20 years old. And yeah, it's kind of its 20th anniversary re-release of the film.
Mm.
So it's interesting how
With a restoration.
Yeah,
that's what I was saying. It's weird to me. I'm 30. It's weird to me to a film that genuinely was one that came out when I was a kid and I saw when I was a kid.
Yeah,
I would have been a bit too young for it because it's a 15, but nonetheless, I saw it when I was a kid. Weird for that to have a restoration. Like, you kind of think of quote-unquote old movies as, well, it's very obvious that they're old. Everyone in them is dead, and the films look different, and they're in black and white, and they're the wrong shape, and that's what an old movie is.
Yeah.
Now this is an old movie. In fact, it's happened before. A couple of years ago, at the Symphony Hall, remember we went to see There Will Be Blood?
Yes.
There Will Be Blood, the Paul Thomas Anderson film, they had a live orchestra playing the score. And I was surprised at how many people who were probably basically 10 years younger than I was, overhearing their conversations, they were talking about it as an old movie.
Yes.
Like a classic or something. And it's like, this is a film from 2007.
Yes.
That was very peculiar to me.
Yes, it's true. Though that makes sense. 2007 is 12 years ago.
Yeah, and it was 10 years ago when we saw.
Okay, so even if you're 10, I mean, the film would have come out when you were 8 years old. I mean, to you, it's an old movie.
Yeah.
To an 18-year-old or 20-year-old, it's an old movie. I mean, I find that it's taken me a while to learn, but I finally understand it.
Yeah, mind you, I think that is still peculiar to me. Like, I think when I was their age, I wasn't thinking of films that had come out 10 years previously as old. I kind of thought of those films as being of a different era, Which, and, to you talking about films that you saw in the 70s and 80s, like, I guess I would maybe think of them as oldish. But,
well, you see, when I was going to the pictures in the 70s, what was being shown on television was really from the 30s to the 60s.
Yeah.
Right? And the 30s being shown late at night, right? Like, I saw all these Warner Brothers films because the CBC in Canada was showing them at around 11:30 at night or something. So that was the old show, right? So, and then you realize that, the difference between, like, 1943 and 1973 is just, it was 30 years. Well, kind of, 30 years ago is like 1990 practically, right?
Yeah.
So, and yet I don't think of films of the 80s as old in the same way that when I was a child I saw, Betty Davis films or something.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you mean. It's funny how it works.
Yeah.
But I think about how Cleopatra lived closer to us than she did to the building of the pyramids.
Oh.
Mad, innit?
Let's talk about the restoration.
Yes, I must say I felt a little bit let down by the restoration. I think I have seen The Matrix at the cinema before. I think it may have been re-released once before. I'm sure I've seen it before, but it's supposed to be this 4K restoration, and I suppose it would have been lovely to have seen it on the IMAX digital screen that Cineworld has, when it wasn't. It was shown on a regular cinema screen. It's not like the film looked bad, but I just didn't notice anything especially kind of sharp or beautiful about the image.
I was disappointed because I remember the film as being like shiny and glossy, with these lovely blacks and greens, that the image had a depth to it, a depth and a smoothness. Yeah. Whereas actually, I think it must be the projection system at Cineworld, right? You know, my first impression of the first 10 minutes or so was that, you know, it looked a bit thin for a restoration. You know,
I think it was projected digitally. I think this is why they were talking about it being a 4K restoration, and I think that makes black levels lighter. You know, because the whole thing is on light shone through it. Whereas because I saw Seven re-release, and it was projected on film at Cineworld, and it looked unbelievable. And that whole film is just symphony of blackness.
Yes.
You know, shadow and darkness everywhere, and you really felt it. Like the whole cinema was dark because of it. And I think this suffered from, you know, not having been projected like that.
Yes, I saw Seven in a silver. I think it was a silver nitrate or silver emulsion copy or whatever it was, and that glowed like magic. So it had all those deep blacks, but then like a kind of a, you know, a silvery amber that just seemed to glow. It was beautiful.
Yeah. So I must say I wasn't that impressed with the look of it as a kind of artifact. Obviously, the look of it as a film is incredibly special. It remains so, and
it does remain so. And
there are these other shots. You kind of said yesterday after we come back. You said they were inventing iconic imagery.
Yes.
You know, like on the fly.
Yes, I mean, you know, to me the film is a masterpiece, really. So, you know, some people think it's shallow, right? That, you know, the ideas that it's dealing with is not dealing with anything new, and it's not dealing it in any kind of particularly complex way. I don't agree. I mean, I would say, what films are you comparing it to, right? Which kind of films takes on that whole cyberpunk thing, you know, applies it to Baudrillard, kind of, and encases it all in this, like, fantastic action movie, you know, that is also kind of visually stunning and kind of imaginatively stunning. I mean, you know, there are things like, you know, when Neo touches the world, right, and it seems to like get stuck and bend to his hands, right?
The mirror.
Yeah, when he begins to sense his powers, right? You know, I mean, that's it remains fantastic, even though now it's probably very easy effect to obtain digitally, right?
Yeah, and one or two of those effects actually look sort of more dated than I expected. There are certain films, and I think this is one of them, where the effects were kind of groundbreaking at the time and actually stand up today still.
Oh yeah,
Jurassic
completely.
Park, Terminator 2, these are all films where, you know, they were kind of inventing these things, but I don't know, there's something about them that they still convince.
Well,
you know,
I think
it's not just about the visual quality, it's about the story and the filmmaking around them that makes you believe them.
I think it's because it's a film in which each shot is judged, right? It's there for a purpose and for an effect. So, you know, when you get these special effects, they're not just there for you to go, wow. They're there, you know, to poetically render something about the world, right, that it's dealing with, or the theme, or that story point. I mean, you know, kind of, when Neo touches the Matrix, right, and it seems to get stuck to him, you know, it's not just for you to go, wow. It's actually for you to understand, kind of, you know, how this world is constructed and malleable. Yeah, and it's kind of a beautiful poetic effect, I think.
Yeah, and it's that Alice through the looking glass thing, down the rabbit hole, which, you know, it's all kind of referenced in dialogue, very explicit. That's why it's a mirror in that scene in particular. You know, it's I think it's a direct reference, or kind of, it's almost like a pun on Alice with the looking glass, like, it's a looking glass in that, it will be a looking glass here, you know, and that's how it's used. Although some of the things don't make sense. I mean, I was surprised. It's a while since I've watched it all the way through, and it's always been. I said to you during it, like, I keep forgetting how many cool scenes are in this.
Yes.
Every time I remember the next scene. Oh, I remember this. Oh, I remember this. How can I have forgotten all this cool stuff that's happening? And it remains just as cool and exciting. But I was sort of surprised in watching it the whole way through, how freely it kind of picks up and drops ideas and motifs. Like, the whole kind of story carries everything through, but there are points where, you know, that they'll pick something up, like that mirror bit. They'll kind of pick it up and drop it, and the idea of it kind of the mirror growing all over him, and then it's going to go down his throat, and it becomes this thing of a race against time. If you think about it for a second, doesn't seem to make all that much sense. Like, what then actually is it, and why have they put something in this room that could be dangerous to him when they're supposed, there's sort of weirdness in it. But
I find those things cohesive, because that's meant to be a kind of a virus, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's when they're freeing him from the Matrix, and you think they would just be sort of taking control and just controlling the situation. But then to have something in the room which all of a sudden can pose a threat to him and make it a race against time to get him out is weird, and it seems to just be there to make for a cinematic effect, basically, to make a kind of threat in that moment. But that's nitpicking. I agree. I can understand why you're looking at me with a sort of what you're doing face. But actually, the film kind of does one or two things like that a little bit more often than I thought. But overall, none of that matters, because despite the fact that it's kind of picking things up and dropping them, the entire thing is cohesive, and it moves, and it's so full of ideas. And I'd much prefer a film to be full of ideas that are dropped or not fully explored, than have like one idea that you get bored of.
Yes, I think it's such an inventive film, and so interesting in the way that it places itself, in what was at that time, I think, a kind of an alternative discourse, or an underground discourse, or an emerging discourse, right? Like the novel New Romancer and Neil Gaiman's work, and I understand that like The Sandman is kind of like an influence, the comic book that Neil Gaiman wrote, and Baudrillard's philosophy, right? They all kind of tie in neatly together. But it's kind of a particular view of the world that was kind of emerging, and that it kind of emerged with the rise of the computer, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And how it then gets played out in this film, I think, is beautiful.
It really kind of fits into that late 90s era that I thought about before, and it's kind of peculiar to, because there's an era of cyberpunk and kind of rave culture, and the music really speaks to me in that respect. It's really evocative of it. Some of it is not like that in the film, but the piece, if you go and look up the kung fu scene where they're fighting in the dojo, the music that goes under that is pure late 90s sort of rave techno, and it's a kind of music that stopped at the turn of the century, and I think it's kind of a whole culture that stopped at the turn of the century. So there's like the Matrix is the only one that kind of broke through, I think, and carried on because it was so successful and huge and a bit different. But if you look at things like The Beach or Johnny Mnemonic or eXistenZ, the Cronenberg film. These are all these are all sort of films that was speaking to an emerging culture that was learning about what the internet was and was developing something new and was very young and vibrant. And seriously, like 9/11 seemed to stop it.
Yeah.
It's like it stopped, just like innocence and weirdness stopped.
And actually, to those I would add that stodgy Sandra Bullock film, The Net, or whatever it was called.
Hackers, was it?
No, there's The Net and there's Hackers.
Right.
And then, what's that other Keanu Reeves film, Through a Lens Darkly or something?
Scanner Darkly. That was long after it.
That was long after.
That was like 2006 or 7, yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, wow. See, I lose all track of time.
That's a really good film, Scanner Darkly. And I think these films are fun movies, and they're not all that great, these other films I've mentioned. But there is something very peculiar to me about that. Like, you can normally see trends and movements in all sorts of arts kind of grow and fade and grow and fade. But this one just seems to stop immediately.
When was that Spielberg film with Jude Law and Ethan Hawke?
AI.
AI.
That was 2002.
Okay.
Was it? It was the one that Kubrick was making, and then he died, and Spielberg took it over.
Okay.
Yeah. That had a similar sort of thing.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm bringing it up, right?
Yeah.
It kind of, it's part of that era. And I think of any of those films that attempted it, including, what is it, Dark City as well, which I love.
I haven't seen Dark City.
I love Dark City. But I think by far this is the superior film to any of those.
Yeah,
right.
Well, that's kind of why I suppose I'm trying to bring them up and draw a distinction, because this is the one that was obviously hugely successful, but it does make me kind of try and work out why. Was there something more kitschy about these other ones, or was there something more of their time? Why is it The Matrix succeeded? Was it kind of drawing? Was it just better made?
It's better made. It's more beautiful, and it gives you a lot of those imminent pleasures that cinema can give on a big screen.
Yeah.
You know. So, for example, I was you know, and I don't think I'm being shallow. I think this is one of the pleasures that need to be examined about cinema itself. I was just kind of gobsmacked anew by how beautiful Keanu Reeves and Carrie Moss are, right? You know, but because of my own particular orientation, I was looking more at Keanu Reeves, right? I mean, it's just beautiful to see him. You know, it's like he moves beautifully, he looks beautiful. You know, kind of the bullet time thing where he bends over. I mean, he just looks beautiful, right? Yeah, don't you think? I mean, that is a great pleasure in kind of in film going, really.
Yeah.
You know, or the blue of, not the blue. I don't think it's blue actually. The color of Carrie Ann Moss's eyes, right? Like, again, just little things like that to see it on a big screen.
Probably green. Everything in the film is green.
Well, I'm not sure now, but you know, and this is terrible because I saw it yesterday, but I can't really remember the. You know, all I remember is that the color of her eyes struck me as being beautiful.
Well, I'm going to find a picture because the internet.
Right.
Let's have a look. Yeah, they were kind of bluey green.
Yeah.
They fit in well with that muted matrixy tone.
She's beautiful.
Well, I particularly noticed Lawrence Fishburne just because of how young he looks. I mean, I know you said they all look young, but you know, I think Keanu Reeves basically looks the same. I think Carrie Ann Moss, for all I know, looks the same because I haven't seen her since The Matrix.
No,
but Lawrence Fishburne really looks young, and it's weird.
Well,
and like,
I think Keanu really looks young. If you compare him to John Wick,
yeah,
I mean,
but maybe that's also because I've seen more '90s Keanu Reeves films, so I'm used to that look more. Whereas Lawrence Fishburne, this is like the earliest film I know of his.
Yes.
You know, I'm familiar with.
Oh no, he was in Apocalypse Now, which has also been revived this year.
I haven't seen.
Yeah, and there he's really young. He's like he's like 17 or something.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. No, I love him. But I want to talk a little bit about Keanu Reeves just before I forget.
Okay.
Because you know, I just realized because we saw Toy Story 4, right, and he plays or he voices Captain Canuck or something, right?
Yeah, whatever. The evil Knievel Canadian stunt rider.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, what an extraordinary year he's had because, you know, is it called Definitely Maybe on Netflix?
Not a clue.
Okay. Can we look it up? Because
He's in a Netflix show.
He's not in it's a movie made for Netflix where he plays himself and it's a romantic comedy. You know, and he's great in it, right? He's very funny, kind of poking fun at his own image.
Always Be My Maybe?
Always Be My... That's right.
Right.
Always Be My Maybe, that's right. So, you know, the John Wick film, the Toy Story 4, the Always Be My Maybe, and then the revival of this. I mean, it's kind of...
People love him.
It's kind of an extraordinary year that he's having. And especially as someone who doesn't seem to do very much normally, right? Like, you know, it seems that, you know, he's not only, it's not only that, you know, he's appearing in all these successful things, because Definitely Be My Baby was a big Netflix thing, yeah? Toy Story 4, of course, massive success. John Wick, massive success. But, you know, they're also kind of different kinds of things, right? You know, so a typical, you know, John Wick is... I mean, I didn't like it that much, really, but, you know, he's very good in it. But it was a massive success, right? And then the voicing of the cartoon. And then this comedy where he's parodying his own image, right? They're different kinds of things that he's doing, you know? So, hurrah, Keanu.
I'm sure he's
I love you.
As far as I'm aware, he just builds expensive motorbikes these days when he's not making movies. I think that's
you know...
Yeah.
I don't know anything. I mean, there's a wonderful article in the New Yorker, you know, about why he's going, why this affection for him, you know, at the moment, and kind of speculating on what that means. You know, so, but other than that, I really, you know, I mean, I don't know, except that there's all the, you know, the sad Keanu meme. And, people have grown very fond of him. You know, which I'm grateful for, I'm happy about. But, and I'm not like a particular fan. I mean, I really don't know anything about his private life or anything. But I am kind of a fan of his presence and his daring, right? Like, you know, so people say, oh, he's a terrible actor and whatever. And, you know, in some ways he definitely has been, you know, but he's got a very interesting presence. and he knows what to do with it, and he's always taking chances, right? Like, you know, I think My Own Private Idaho, which is like this combination of like grunge and Shakespeare and, you know, queer cinema. I mean, you know, no other young leading man of that era would have kind of, you know, done something like except River Phoenix, who he did it with. Right? So I think he's earned that affection, really. But anyway, that's just a side point, really. Just as commentary that this film is being re-released amidst all of these, you know, appearances in different kinds of very successful films, and yeah.
Yeah. Let's return to The Matrix then. I think we were both surprised at how slowly it started.
Yes.
I think we remember it as these, you know, we remember the action scenes, we remember bullet time, and remember the fight in the lobby.
Yes.
But what we don't remember is how much it takes its time to set things up. And I don't just mean the first kind of 10-15 minutes before he even meets Morpheus, but that is a while. But even once he is freed, it's a good hour or more of kind of explanations and learning the rules of the world and scene setting and all this kind of stuff, which is for the audience, really. And actually, I think now, to me at least, it was kind of boring, just because I'm very familiar with all of that, so I don't need all those kind of rules explained to me again. And I don't think it's ever clunky or anything like that. I don't think it's ever clunky or inefficient. I think everything is done, every kind of rule is explained, or every nuance or everything about how the Matrix works is explained, not just through dialogue, but through action and filmmaking. It's shown, not told. And it's also done in a way that asks questions that aren't just about, for instance, in the dojo scene I mentioned, it's all about how Neo needs to learn about breaking the rules, about that he's in a system, that he is now outside, that he can affect things, he can go beyond the rules that he knows inside. But then it's coupled with this thing of, you think that's air you're breathing now? It's done in a way that is evocative and meaningful, and it's not just, it's not as simple as saying, you need to learn this and here is the answer. Everything kind of raises a further question. I think so although it is kind of slow, and I think it was obviously very necessary for new audiences, and you would still need that now if you hadn't seen it before.
It's slow, but it's also well paced.
Yeah.
So one of the things that struck me that I had misremembered really is the beginning of the film, where it begins with Trinity, right? And that fantastic moment where she leaps in the air and time is suspended, and then she kicks, right?
Bullet time.
Was that bullet time?
Yeah, the effect is bullet time.
Okay.
The camera spinning around in stop or slow motion.
Okay.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. It's not just when he falls over. That's the name of the effect.
Well, so then at the very beginning you get a taste of that, because it certainly kind of is developed kind of later on in a much more dramatic way. But even that initial moment, you think, wow, right? Like, it's just fantastic. And I've forgotten, because that thing is introduced with her, right? Not with Neo. Yeah? So it was interesting kind of coming back to the movie and seeing, which are the moments of intensity in this film, and how is it how do they play out? And I think you're right that, the whole first hour is about giving you the kind of information that you need to be able to make sense of what this world is like and what can take place in it, right? And because what it's like and what can take place in it was then so unusual, great care is taken in signaling it and kind of situating yourself within that world. But I think and I did feel as like you that it was slower than I remembered it, but I didn't feel that way by the end of the film. No,
not at all. I also think it's interesting how the film starts off as a kind of different film. By the film that it is at the end, it's very it's not really an action film at the start, although it starts off with an action scene and a chase. Yes. It actually starts off kind of like a crime film.
Yes,
I think,
like a noir.
Right. Yeah, it's like this guy gets involved in something that might be over his head, but Neo's already committing crimes. You see him selling this disc. So he's obviously kind of he's living a double life, as Agent Smith says to him. But Agent Smith takes him in. You don't know who he is. You don't know that he's an agent of the system. You think he's like an FBI guy. It's apart from the fact that you've seen an action scene in which mad stuff is happening, kind of unusual stuff is happening, people saying she shouldn't be able to jump that far, that sort of thing. You know, you get this hint of there's something kind of supernatural going on, let's say, or beyond the rules of the world. But apart from that, it's a crime movie, and it's kind of down to earth, and it's interesting. Like, you know, the scene under the bridge, which he gets in the car. They get him to get in the car, and it's raining, coming down. That's pure noir, and it's beautiful. Actually, it has a line that I don't like. It has that thing about they say it's our way or the highway, and he goes to get out the car, and Trinity says, you know, you've been down that road before, you know where it leads, and he gets back in, and it's a line that I've never had peace with that line, because I think it's there for effect. I can't tell if she's talking about suicide.
No.
If she's talking about knowing that he has tried to commit suicide before. That was like the idea of that particular road might have having been somewhere that he might have.
No, I just
had a trauma.
I didn't read it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I just read it. He's trying to find answers before, and they've led nowhere, right? So he's tried that world before, and it's led nowhere.
The thing is, I don't know. It's the use of the words "that road." You've been down that road, because that road could be, you know, generally that you've been down that path before. You've been down, you know, you've tried to do that sort of thing before. Or it could be that road specifically, which the camera then cuts to, which suggests like there's something specific about that actual road. I've never quite figured that line out.
I haven't looked at it with the care that you have. Clearly,
it's just struck me as something unexplained before. I don't know, but
I mean, I think that the film is suffused with noir imagery. I mean, you know, the whole initial setting is noir, you know, and I think this is kind of also where the influence of films like Blade Runner come in, because, you know, kind of clearly in films of this era and beyond, the future is noir, right? And so kind of science fiction becomes more and more and more infused with noir, right? The future is bleak, right? All dystopias that are being posited, and actually, kind of, I think that's what's so interesting about this film, because on the one hand, you know, it posits kind of the worst dystopia you can imagine, like people become batteries, right? And they're not even aware or conscious of their own existence, you know, except kind of, you know, an imagined one that doesn't really exist. But it takes that and makes it hopeful, you know. Yeah, kind of resistance, you know, the whole last speech that kind of Neo gives on the phone at the end. Yeah. Right? I mean, it's very interesting because, you know, kind of the dystopia is rendered utopian at the end.
Yeah, it's because of the people. It's like humanity is what's utopian. You know, I think that's sort of the message, at least to me. Like, the idea is that where humanity is, there is hope. You know, because the world is not a nice place anymore. The world's fucking horrible. They've had to dig underground for the last remaining bits of warmth in the Earth's core, all that sort of thing. You know, the world is not a nice place anymore. But it's the people.
But the film's message is a utopian one. You can get out of this. Yeah, you can find a solution. You can fight back. Right? Like, you can change things. You can beat the system. Yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of rather fascinated by that, really.
There's it's something that struck me, which I don't think's ever struck me before about the film, which is about everyone else who's still plugged into the Matrix. Because for a lot of the film, particularly towards the end, a lot of them become cannon fodder. Yes. You know, like the police or security guards who try to stop them. Yes. You know, call for backup in the lobby, and then 50 of them get killed. Because there's this thing about how while people are still plugged into the Matrix and not ready to be unplugged, they are innocents, but to our freedom fighters, that makes them enemies, because they are part of the system still, and also they can be taken over by agents, which is another sort of thing in it. But the idea that, like, it was the first time that it struck me that the only real enemies are the agents. Yes. And I kind of felt bad for all of the security guards who died just because they were in the way and they had to die.
Well, they are literally collateral damage, aren't they? Right, because they are taken over by someone. They're taken over by the system. They're acting against their will, you know, and they die as a result. Or, yeah, they're acting unconsciously rather than They have no will.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so
under false pretenses.
Yeah.
They're being fooled into acting a certain way.
Yeah. So what I found very interesting, which I think is kind of now you can see it throughout the Wachowskis' career, really, is their inclusivity, right? Because so you know you have Keanu Reeves as the star, right, and he's kind of mixed race, and then yes, he is. I think he's Hawaiian and he's Chinese Hawaiian or something like that, right? And then you have Lawrence Fishburne, and then like all of the crew of the ship, all of the good guys, right? You know, they're either like Chinese or black or Latino or it's kind of unusual to see that that racial range, so to speak. Yeah, and all of the bad guys are all white. Yeah,
white men in suits,
exactly,
combed hair, all the rest.
Yeah. So, and I thought that, and I think that's very
symbols of conformity and sort of whiteness. I mean, actually, it's Thomas Anderson's boss. Thomas Anderson being Neo's kind of human name. His boss looks like Agent Smith.
Yeah.
Sounds like Agent Smith.
Yes.
You know, they're all part of the same system to keep them in control and all the rest.
Yes.
And it's a very white and kind of corporate thing.
Exactly.
You know.
Right. But it's very unusual in a film of that time, to have given a female protagonist that amount of action sequences, right? Like Carrie-Anne Moss is an action heroine. And then to have made all of the good guys Latinos, Chinese, black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, the one bad guy amongst the good guys is Joe Pantoliano.
That's right.
He's just a New York twat. And also, was it the character Switch who's on the dykey side, you might say?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, so to have had that range of types, right, I think for some reason it should have stood out more to me when I first saw it, but I think I didn't really quite register that as one of the film's pleasures. But in retrospect, it becomes one. And in retrospect, and looking through the Wachowskis' career, it's actually a characteristic of their work, you know, that inclusiveness. So that was pleasing. How did the action sequences hold up to you?
Brilliantly well. You know, the thing is, when we saw this, it was supposed to start at 8:00, and then because we thought there weren't going to be trailer stuff because it was, you know, re-showing
a one-off, yeah,
exactly. And there were fucking 25 minutes of trailers and adverts, so it actually started at 25 past, which meant that I was going to basically get to work nearly an hour late. So by the time the action was starting, that was like 10:00 when I need to be at work. And so on the one hand, I was kind of going, oh well, I'm going to be late, but the action just made me forget about all my responsibilities. And you know what? I mean, I don't know what's in my old job. I left early once to go and see Lawrence of Arabia. You know, sometimes
with
you just,
me.
Yeah, with you. Sometimes you just gotta.
Yeah.
You know? The action just again, this is something that was kind of a surprise watching it again with kind of fresh-ish eyes. I suppose I kind of remembered the action as being much larger scenes than they were. Obviously, there's the lobby fight, which is a single scene. They start it, they fight it, they finish it in one go. But everything else, the stuff that when they're coming to get Morpheus, it's all intercut with Morpheus being tortured by Agent Smith and having that conversation. And that conversation is all about ideas, and all about what makes us human, and Agent Smith being like a prisoner, this sort of thing. But it's all intercut, and I suppose I was sort of slightly surprised about it because it's, you know, like the bullet time, the famous bullet time bit where he dodges the bullets and falls down. It's not long into having cut into that scene that happens. You know, they basically you hear them go, "We're being fought. They're on the roof." You see them fighting on the roof for about 30 seconds, and then the bullet time happens. It's not like the culmination of a huge action scene. It's just a moment. You know, I was kind of, I don't know. it always felt like a much bigger moment. And it's not like it's a small moment, it is a moment, and it's a huge thing, and he manages to dodge the bullets, which he's been told no one can do, and they manage to shoot the agent, which they've been told no one can do. So it's a massive thing. But the pacing surprised me, the way it was intercut surprised me. I'd forgotten how it worked.
Yes.
But it worked very well.
It's beautiful. What did you think of the philosophical dimension of the film, right? Because this is a film in which people who were into it, geeks, went over every line like it was a line from the Bible or something, right?
Well, this is another reason that I was bringing up all those other films before, eXistenZ and The Beach and that sort of thing, because I think one of the commonalities between all these films, or at least some of the best examples of them, is they were all trying to talk about similar sort of ideas.
Yes.
These ideas were in the water at the time.
Yes.
And The Matrix is just one film that is dealing with them. But I think one of the reasons that we were saying these films kind of didn't stand the test of time or kind of last in the way that The Matrix has is because The Matrix deals with them much more successfully and much more intelligently and raises more interesting questions out of them and comes up with kind of complex ideas. There are so many ways of looking at things.
Yes.
It's like Groundhog Day, like how every person or every religion that looks at Groundhog Day finds a different way of looking at it.
Yes.
I think The Matrix has something similar about that. You can find what you're looking for in it.
Yes, well, I think it's a film that lends itself to complex readings. So kind of, I would like to see these people who say, oh, it's a superficial film, it's kind of banal, the ideas that it's dealing with and whatever. Well, again, in comparison to what? And how would you answer this person's reading of the film or that person's reading of the film? Who people make very complex readings of this film. So I think it's a film that has depth for those who are willing to engage with it, right? Because I must say I'm not one of those people who wanted to analyze every line and had 25 different readings of the significance of the blue pill versus the red pill, or I'm not that kind of film goer. But I really like, have liked reading other people's responses to it on that level. And I think it stacks up and it measures up. And if you want to think about those things, the film offers you a lot of food with which to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's an inviting film to think about kind of metaphorically, as opposed to the way that people really like to think about films these days, which I've been doing a little bit of kind of, as you say, the blue pill. It wouldn't be so much like what's the significance of the blue pill and the red pill, but how do they work? That's kind of way people I think like to think about films an awful lot now. How does it work, and how did this happen, and what's going to happen next? Films with ambiguous endings. Well, what logically must happen next? Well, the point of an ambiguous ending is it doesn't matter. It's cueing you to think about things differently, to think about things metaphorically and thematically. This film is not one with an ambiguous ending, I don't think.
No.
And it does go on in the sequels to develop its world an awful lot more.
And in fact, it's not an ambiguous film, except that I think it's rich enough to allow for ambiguity, if you know what I mean. Yeah, like kind of, at every moment when you're watching it, for me anyway, things are perfectly clear. And actually one of the things that I love, you're also geographically situated in the action, which I require, in order to be satisfied. But I think it's just a film that is so rich that actually it lends itself to many different readings and many different interpretations, really, that you can then kind of test against another. So I think it is a kind of a complex film. Certainly it's one through which philosophy has not only been read but done, right?
Yeah.
And
it's put right in there from the start. There was this whole thing about Baudrillard and how in one of the first drafts of the script, Baudrillard was name checked at one point in the scene where Morpheus is telling Neo about the desert of the real.
Yeah.
He said as Baudrillard said, was in his dialogue in one of the early scripts, which would have been a bit too clunky. But still,
we saw the book.
Still, the book that he gets a discount of is Simulacrum Simulation. The chapter that he opens up to is on nihilism. Yeah. That must mean something.
Yes.
These things are name checked. There's a whole kind of allegory of the cave thing going on as well. I think the interesting thing about the allegory of the cave is that as I recall it, in the allegory of the cave, part of it is that you're sat there watching these flames flicker on the wall, and you become an expert in how the flames flicker, and you go, well, that means this and this means that, and I'm so good at the flames. And then you get let out and you see what actual sunlight looks like, and you're like, that's not a tree, the shadow, that's a tree, I know what a tree looks like. But eventually you realise this is actually what the world is, and I've had the wool pulled over my eyes. But the point is, you go back into the cave and try and tell everyone else, and they think you're a dickhead. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about, this is what trees are. And that kind of final part of the allegory of the cave is kind of interesting, because I think that's sort of what, when they talk about the people not being ready to be unplugged in this, then that kind of speaks about there's a kind of, it's not as simple as freeing people. People actually aren't ready to be free. They won't accept what they're being told. Now, part of the thing is Neo is throwing up and denying it all over the place at the start. It takes a long time for him to accept what he's being told, and I think that kind of, the kind of expression of the mental sort of toll it takes on him early on is kind of interesting. It's very easy to kind of jump into, well, we're going to learn how to fly planes and do kung fu now. But the time it takes for him to relearn his world, I think, is really interesting. And again, it leads they're constantly picking up on questions about it, like when they're all in the sort of mess hall in the Nebuchadnezzar, and they're having lunch, and they're eating that goop.
Yes.
And he says, the dozer says it's got amino acids and vitamins and everything the body needs. And then Mouse goes, it's not everything the body needs.
Yes.
And then he talks about sex.
Yes.
And the kind of, it becomes a pimp for the woman in the red dress.
Yes.
But it's like, I think that's one of those places where I think it's really, really elegant. It's telling you the rules of the thing. It's telling you how this world works, but it's doing so in a way that asks you a question. What is it to be human? As you're always so fond of asking. What is it to be human? What do we need? How do we live? I think that actually there was it made me think of a really recent Black Mirror episode. I don't know if you've watched the recent Black Mirrors. They came up with 3 new episodes recently. And there's one about a kind of virtual reality video game where you put this little dot on your head and you just become the characters in the game. And it's a fighting game. And so this guy plays it online with his mate. And the one guy plays a guy and the other guy plays a girl. And they realise that in the game, instead of fighting, they can have sex. And so they start having an affair with each other. Right? And it's quite a sweet episode, actually, because it ends up with this kind of agreement with his wife that once a week you can have sex with your friend and I can go off and cheat on you. Like it's a sweet sort of, like, they develop a new sort of loving relationship. But that reminded me of it. It's like this is the kind of things we need, and we could live through it sort of virtually. It's like, and what's the difference between what you experience in your head and what you experience in real life? Like, the thing in the Black Mirror episode is, this is the best sex this guy's ever had, and he becomes incredibly close with his friend, and it's really troubling for him because of that. Like, okay, now it would have been weird, I think, if they'd done that in the Matrix. So like, well, it's virtual reality, we can fuck who we like. It's not the point of the film. But I think that's kind of, it's in there, not in the same way, but it's in there in a sense. The sort of, you can make the world what you want, you can live how you want. Like this thing about residual self-image. The version of you in the Matrix is what you imagine yourself to look like, and they don't look the same in the Matrix as they do out of it, and they wear all these cool suit stuff. Like in Fight Club, the thing about how Jack imagines Tyler, spoilers, and it's supposed to be a satire on toxic masculinity. But the thing is, Tyler looks like and it's textual. Tyler says, I look like you want to look, like fuck like you want to fuck. I am the perfect man in every way that you are not, right? Because he's fucking Brad Pitt.
Yes.
It's similar sort of thing. Like one of the reasons that they can be so cool in the Matrix and look cool to the audience is because they can do what they like. You can learn to fly a helicopter and start flying around New York as quickly as you want. You can beat up anyone. Anyway, I don't know, I'm going on, but
you are. I want to say a few words just about the look, right? And so we've talked a little bit about the look of the film, but one of the things that's really striking is just the look of Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss, right? With those shades and those coats, that move so beautifully, and she's wearing rubber, and actually it's kind of quite clunky. It's like it's kind of very much of its era, like this outfit made of rubber material, But it looks fantastic. Yeah, and it has become kind of, I think, the poster of them with that kind of green lettering that resembles the computers of the era, you know, has become like iconic. Yeah, it's instantly recognizable. You instantly know what it's referencing.
Yeah.
So, do you have any thoughts on it?
It really reminds me of how my mate Ben used to dress, and like, and it's because that's how Neo dressed in the Matrix. You know, the big long trench coat, leather, this sort of thing. I remember my mate Ben was like, he used to even fucking fold his arms behind his back like Morpheus does. Like, just give it a rest. But like it became a thing that immediately you wanted to copy, and it became, as I was saying, like it's such a cool image above everything else. It's something that you want to ape and copy, and.
You know, one of the things that it made me think of is because the film is so much of its time, right? You know, so it still works brilliantly, but you know, one of the things I thought, I wonder what would happen if they'd remake it with like smartphones instead of dial phones.
Yes.
Or you know, the computers are so large and clunky, right? Like, you know, the film begins with this, or at the very beginning of the film, maybe not the first image, but. In the beginning, you see Keanu sprawled over, you know, his computer terminals, right? That each looks like a 2-ton truck with like these huge keyboards splattered all over his desk, right? You know, and you think, I wonder.
It's absolutely true. And what really struck me is in the Nebuchadnezzar, the screen setup for all the way they interact with the Matrix. You've got the 3 terminals which have the green rain, and you have various screens on the sides, and not only are there so many screens, whereas if you look at it these days, if you look at something like the Marvel films, for instance, everything that they do in terms of interacting with the computer is all virtual reality, and it's like holograms and things.
Yes.
Like that's how it would be done now, I think. Not only is it the kind of physicality and the way that it's obviously built out of technology of the time sort of thing, but it's also how flimsy it is. Like every time that Tank presses things and goes over and touches a screen, the whole setup moves and shakes. Like it's not solid. And I think it's deliberate, you know, like that. It's also about the precarity of their situation. Like they're in this spaceship thing, a hovercraft they call it, which is vulnerable, and by the end it's getting broken into, and like that is their only sort of safety. They're not in Zion.
What's the term for that, you know, that Victorian futuristic...
Steampunk.
Yeah, I think time has given a patina of steampunk to the Matrix.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of, those big monitors, the keyboards, the manual phones, the 6-inch drives, the wobbliness and so on of things. It gives it a steampunk quality.
This is also an era, and again, this goes back to those other films I was talking about. This is also an era in which people were still working out what the internet was and what computers were going to be. And you see that so clearly in Hackers, for instance, which is bizarre to today's eyes, you know, but it's kind of it. And I think the reason that you can still watch Hackers is not so much, I mean, apart from nostalgia, if you watched it at the time, the reason I think you could still watch Hackers is not so much about the way the computers work and the way they kind of have these hacking fights, but it's more about the ideas of kind of people having your information or people being able to control you through the computers and that sort of thing. Those are still quite relevant ideas. But I think, you know, there is something very dated and funny to our eyes about the way that these new technologies were being worked through, and they were trying to work out visual languages to talk about them and just trying to work out what they were. I remember in Mission Impossible, the first one, there's that whole section where Ethan Hunt is looking for Job in his hotel room, and he starts going on like Usenet groups and typing in Job at 316.com, and he's like, that's not how an email address works, you know. But maybe it sort of had something. Maybe it was sort of like how the internet worked back then. It was a very ad hoc, incipient world.
But all of those things, I think, changed film narratives so dramatically. So, for example, the scene that I remember in that first Mission Impossible film is Emilio Estevez stuck on the lift, right, looking through his computer, a laptop, in fact, right, and how his computer was divided into 6 screens. And so actually, by going through the computer, you now could cut to 6 different areas, in a way that made it seamless and coherent and chronological, right? Whereas you couldn't do that before. You couldn't cut from one area to another. Like the motivation for the movement through the spaces was not there. Whereas the computer instantly gave you that motivation to cut through 6 different spaces.
Yeah.
So anyway,
that's interesting. One more thing I want to pick up on is the scene with the Oracle.
Yes.
And actually not so much because of the ideas involved, although it's an ideas scene. But it's because of Gloria Foster's performance.
Yes.
That was the point of the film where, I suppose up until then it had been, doing that thing I was saying about explaining the rules and you learning the world, and it's all very entertaining and cool and fun. But that's the point where something emotional about it becomes alive.
Yes.
And I don't think it's even necessarily about who Neo is and the thing about, because what the Oracle tells him is, you're not the one. You've been told all this time, Morpheus thinks you're the one, I'm here to tell you that you're not. It's not about him being disappointed in that or anything like that. It's something about just her
warmth,
homeliness, and and her humour. And it's a beautifully written, put together and shot scene.
And she's wonderful.
The setting is great, this kitchen, and she says it right at the start, not what you're expecting, right?
Yeah.
An oracle. It's a kitchen in a flat in New York.
Yes. But also, I want to give credit to the Wachowskis there. Because if you can imagine somebody coming up with an idea of an oracle, you'd never think that the oracle would be, a 60-year-old woman.
Black woman.
A black woman, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, 60-year-old woman and black, right? Yeah. So I also don't think that, an oracle would have been unlikely that an oracle would have been a woman. Would have been, and then for it to be a black woman, even more so. I thought that was
maybe that's a stereotype I can see. To be fair, a kind of a wise old woman who just sits there alone thinking.
It's always a man under a tree in a forest, an oracle. Kind of a fortune teller. Sure, you could have that as a woman, but an oracle, right?
Maybe.
So, and of course, here the oracle is a little bit of a fortune teller, which kind of.
But it's self-knowing, and again, it's that wonderful, wonderful line about don't mind about the vase.
Yes.
What vase? He knocked it over. I said, don't worry about it. And then it's, would you have knocked it over if I hadn't said anything?
Yes.
And they've got laughs in the audience. I mean, It's funny, the audience actually. I don't know how many of them. Tough to tell how many of them had seen it before. How many were revisiting it? How many were seeing it for the first time?
Well, there were a lot of fathers and sons watching it.
Were there?
Yes.
They must have thought we were some of them.
Well, maybe. We're certainly the right age. But there were a lot of people who looked like 45 or, early 40s maybe, with an 18, 19-year-old. There were a lot of fathers and sons.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. And it got reactions in all the right places. And that scene in particular got good laughs. And I think it's really supposed to. I think there is such warmth and humour in that scene. And it's such a kind of... It became like an emotional centre of the film for me, which I hadn't realised before.
Yes, well, it becomes a pivot, right? Because then for the rest of the film, everybody, certainly the audience, is asking, is he or isn't he? Right? And the film is playing on those expectations that, on this doubt that it now sets up. Yeah,
that's true. It sets it up as a question, which I don't think I'd ever seen it as a question before, although she poses it.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd ever seen it as... genuinely making the audience think, oh, maybe he isn't. Like, it's always seemed to me so obvious that he would be.
Well, for me not, you see. And actually, part of this thinking that maybe he isn't lends a kind of an urgency and a charge to the fight scenes. Because he might get hurt. So it adds potentiality to how you think. Kind of things are not as clear cut. You don't think, oh, he'll get out of it because he is the one. You think, well, maybe
that's another reason why when he faces that agent, it's terrifying. If that doubt is in your head. Can I talk about one more thing just quickly?
Sure.
And it is a quick one. Because there's a love story in it, but I don't think the love story is particularly affecting or even sort of believable. There's definitely an affection from Trinity to Neo. You see these kind of looks that linger slightly. The way she hangs around outside his room, the thing about you never brought me dinner. That sort of thing. So there's clearly an affection there. And it's not like you don't believe that she could fall in love with him, but right at the end when she kisses him, he's dead. the ship's being broken into, chaos is reigning all around them. It feels like it should be. It's trying to be a really deeply dramatic, melodramatic even moment.
I think it is.
It didn't. That didn't work for me, and I don't think it ever has worked for me.
Well, for me it did, because basically, and you can tie it to all kinds of things, right? Kind of, it's love brings him back to life. It's her love that's kind of then if he is the one, then like kind of Christ is love, right? Like, you could just go on and on with that. But the situation, I mean, I think it's underplayed, so I can see why it's not perceived as this big melodramatic moment. But in fact, it is written as one.
Well, that's what I don't think it is underplayed. Like I say, I think you've got he's dead and the ship is being invaded by the Sentinels and there's sparks and destruction all around them. It's a huge moment. It's
a huge moment, but it is underplayed. Yeah, you could have acted it kind of, you could have acted it more floridly, or given more emphasis to the lines, but I think she underplays it. I think they both do.
Yeah, maybe. Well, he's dead, isn't he?
Yeah.
So,
but the coming back to life is underplayed,
yes.
right?
No, that's
so,
true. But I think the moment that actually did affect me emotionally, apart from what I was feeling in the Oracle scene, is they've just rescued Morpheus. They're in the helicopter. They're flying off. The helicopter's just been shot, so it's about to crash. They need to land it somewhere if they can. She manages to drop Morpheus and Neo onto a couple of roofs, and then she's still in the helicopter, about to fly into a building and die. And it's Neo. It's this thing. It's the part of the film where Neo is starting to believe about himself, that he is the one, that he can do these things, and he gets the sort of rope or whatever, the line that is connected to the helicopter, and the helicopter starts dragging him towards the edge of the roof, and it's what seems to be a really futile gesture. How can he stop a helicopter? But he's doing it to save her. He's doing it because he believes in himself. And the moment of that scene, that sequence, it's not even a full scene. The moment of the sequence that really got me is the shot of Morpheus looking at him doing it. It's because Morpheus is the one who's now being doubted by everyone, saying that he's not the one. But Morpheus, it's like the culmination of his belief in Neo.
Yes.
What he thought was true. He's got through to him, and everything he's been working for matters. And then he's looking at him. Neo doesn't know he's looking at him. It's a moment for Morpheus. I don't know. There's something about that really grabbed me this time. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
I'm good. I'm really glad. Really glad. Sorry, I'm really glad it came back out.
Yes.
At the cinema, because it's a proper cinema movie.
Yes, it is. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, kind of see it. If you have seen it, see it again. It's really worth it. It's really one of the great films of the last 20 years.
And then listen to all of the commentary tracks, which are all philosophers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Warner Brothers are really into it being a kind of a philosophy text. And so they have a couple of tracks in which philosophers discuss ideas. I haven't listened to any of them yet.
Oh, right.
But yeah, that's kind of interesting. They're selling it as that,
Righto. Well, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
SoundCloud, YouTube, and iTunes to listen to. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.